Okay, well, we're on and we're recording, and let me say hello to each of you, whether you're watching this live tonight, this Tuesday, or watching it later on a YouTube recording. We are thrilled that you are here, so thank you so much. And this is really lesson or session number 4, and we're having a great time. At least I'm just so thrilled to share some of these pictures and some biblical connections with you. So the first 3, of course, we've looked at Israel, and tonight we transition to Jordan. And by the way, I worked on the first part of Egypt today, so next Tuesday we'll do Egypt, and actually we'll do 2 sessions in Egypt. And then I'll just give you a heads up now. I know one of the Tuesdays, actually the first Tuesday um, in November, falls on election day. So we're going to do a Monday night session that night. And of course, keep Tuesday clear. But that's the plan. And of course, tonight, as I mentioned, we're traveling to Jordan on this traveling Tuesday. So I'll pray as we begin. We'll continue to pray for our nation and pray for God's leading of our encounter tonight. So let me pray as we begin. Lord, thank you so much for the day, for everyone tuned in today, whether it's live or on the recording. We are so thankful of what you do in our lives. And as we now open up another world, really, of the Bible, a land of the Bible, we travel to Jordan together, and just give us a good insight and a heart to learn as we make connections with your word. Once again, we pray these things humbly in Christ's name. Amen. Well, again, we will share the screen, and one final welcome to every one of you. I think a few others have just joined as well. So let me share my screen, and then we'll get started. So here we go. Jordan, that's where we're heading, and we're going to actually cross right away. In fact, why don't I just get the map out here, just so that if you're not familiar with Jordan, I think most of you are, but of course, here's the map, and I think I do have some other maps embedded in this teaching. But Jordan, as you see, is this area here to the east. So if you look at where I'm pointing to, we just are crossing the Jordan River right here at a place called the Allenby Bridge. In fact, in this slide, you can actually see back to Jericho. And then we're going to actually go north about, I should say right there, if I can see where I'm pointing to. And then all the way down to the southern end to Petra, and eventually Wadi Rum. And that's where we end our session tonight. So the land of Jordan is, of course, a modern country, and pretty much an Arab country as well. But as we cross the Allenby Bridge, we immediately come to this place called Bethany Beyond the Jordan. Now, there's a couple biblical connections here that we will stop to pay attention to. The first are some ruins that are not dating back to the time of Elijah or Elisha, but they are here to help us remember what happens in 2 Kings chapter 2. But topographically, you can still see back looking west of the area of Jericho, which is just off to the left of the picture, but you can see part of the Judean desert still. But we're looking east to west, and yet some ruins here that remind us of a story. So I guess I did have a map here embedded. So here's the Dead Sea, and Jericho's right there. So we cross at the Allenby Bridge, which is right here. And then you can actually see, maybe on the slide, it's actually on the map, Bethany Beyond the Jordan. It's mentioned in John chapter 1. So we're talking about an Old Testament and a New Testament story. So in this area somewhere, we're not specifically sure, but east of the Jordan River, we can read from 2 Kings chapter 2. I guess I won't read all of this, but just follow along as we pay attention to this narrative that involves a guy named Elijah the prophet and Elisha. Now, traditionally, and I'll use that word probably pretty loosely here because, again, specifically, we don't know where this happened, but it must have been on this side because Elijah and Elisha had a circuit, if you will, of ministry between Bethel, Jericho, and Gilgal. So this is just to the east of the river, and 50 men from the company of the prophets went and stood at a distance, facing the place where Elijah and Elisha had stopped at the Jordan. Elijah took his cloak, rolled it up, and struck the water with it. The water divided to the right and to the left, and they crossed on dry ground. So the second time, of course, that the Jordan splits. The first time is from the east to the west, as Joshua was leading his people to the other side of the river. But then we pick it up in verse 9, as they were walking along and talking together. Here's this great narrative. Suddenly, a chariot of fire and horses of fire appeared and separated the two of them. And Elijah, could it be right here? Who knows? He went up to heaven in a whirlwind. And Elisha saw this and cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel. And Elisha saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment and tore it in two. And then verse 13, Elisha then picked up Elijah's cloak that had fallen from him and went back and stood at the bank of the Jordan. Incidentally, Elisha then would go back all the way to Jericho, and if you recall, he purified the waters there at the site of Jericho. So the Old Testament connection, again, not specifically happening here, but probably in the general area. But John 1 does pinpoint this area called Bethany Beyond the Jordan. We have some Byzantine ruins here. And by the way, the river is just beyond this canopy here that's protecting some other mosaics of this 4th, 5th, 6th century AD Byzantine site. So, of course, the Jordan River probably took another pathway from north to south to the Dead Sea. So some would suggest that the water came at least past this area where at least the Byzantines commemorated where Jesus was baptized. But here is what the Jordan looks like today. We're actually looking to the Israel side. This is technically how close we get. There's only a couple places along the whole Jordan Valley where you can get this close to the border. And of course, right here, the river essentially is the border. So we have armed soldiers, Jordanian and Israeli, on both sides of this river. And you can see how really dirty and muddy this is at this point. But the Jordan River is where Jesus was set aside. So here's the narrative that mentions this location. Now the Pharisees who had been sent questioned him, why then do you baptize if you are not the Messiah or Elijah, nor the prophet? And of course, they're directing this question to John the Baptist. I baptize with water, John replied, but among you stands one you do not know. He is the one who comes after me, the straps of whose sandals I am not worthy to untie. This all happened at Bethany beyond the other side of the Jordan, where John was baptizing. We also know that John was baptizing at a place called Salim, which is north of here, about 20 miles of this Bethany beyond the Jordan. But this is most likely, again, the area where Jesus was set apart for ministry. So a little further up from Bethany beyond the Jordan, as we now see a few sites in Jordan, is the traditional place of the death of Moses and where Moses viewed the promised land. This is a restored Byzantine chapel, has great mosaics. We'll see them in a short moment, but they probably worked 3 or 4 years of redoing this church. Of course, it looks very modern today, but It's built over some Byzantine ruins here on Mount Nebo. So Mount Nebo is about right here. So this is where Moses and Deuteronomy 31 through 34 actually viewed part of the Promised Land. Of course, we're going to see the Dead Sea right here. So you can see this angle looking pretty much west and a little south. This is the entire northern edge of the Dead Sea, which means Qumran is over about here, and Gedi is further south. In fact, on a clear day at night, especially, you can see the lights of Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is only about 18 miles west from this point here on the north end of the Dead Sea. Jericho is still off to the right. So Moses stood here. And of course, as we sort of pan to the right or to the north, we can see the area of Jericho. And Jerusalem would be right here on the ridge of the hill country of Judah. This would be the plains of Moab. They're mentioned, of course, in Deuteronomy as well as in the book of Joshua. So pretty much a barren area. This area does have a few sites. In fact, in this vicinity right over here is a site identified by some, a guy named Dr. Collins, as Sodom or Sodom. Now, there's a big argument whether Sodom is to the south of the Dead Sea, which historically, and I guess I'll use the word traditionally, but I'm not using it in the way of or the sense of a Christian tradition, but there's another archaeological site actually in Jordan down further south, and historical geographers have placed it there. But the new theory is that Sodom or Sodom is located in this area here, maybe identified also with the city called Shittim. Shittim, it's mentioned in Joshua also. But look how large and wide this part of the valley is. And of course, it's green here because the river that flows from the north to the south, the Jordanians, a part of the peace agreement with the Israelis, really end up utilizing a lot of the water here. Again, back here on the slopes of the Judean desert is Jericho. So further north would be the hills of Gilead. And we can't see that far, but this is what Moses saw as he had a panoramic view of the promised land, the holy land that he did not enter. He was 120 years old. His eyes were still good, as the text tells us. Although, you turn to Matthew 17 and others where Jesus is transfigured, and maybe Moses did see the promised land in a different time, of course, much later, but that's an interesting perspective to combine those two. Now, standing right in front of this chapel is this big bronze item. We'll get back to that in a moment, but inside is the chapel. Of course, it's a little blurry, I guess, this picture, but you can see some of the older Byzantine columns. A lot of Catholic churches do a few masses here or services, but look how meticulous and detailed these mosaics are. Tesserae, these small square stones. So how many tesserae make up this one relief on the floor of this chapel? This chapel actually dates somewhat to the 4th, 5th, and 6th centuries. So it was built and rebuilt a few times, but look how detailed these mosaics are. But as to this standing bronze snake, if you will, this is what we read from the Bible. And now, of course, we're talking about the days of Moses. Then the Lord sent venomous snakes among them. They bit the people, and many Israelites died. The people came to Moses and said, "We sinned when we spoke against the Lord and against you. Pray that the Lord will take the snakes away from us." So Moses prayed for the people. The Lord said to Moses, "Make a snake and put it up on a pole. Anyone who is bitten can look at it and live." Then when anyone was bitten by a snake and looked at the bronze snake, they lived. This is the narrative from Numbers chapter 21. But Jesus actually references this in chapter 3. Just as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man, there's a borrowed term or phrase, a messianic title, if you will, borrowed from the book of Daniel. So the Son of Man must be lifted up, that everyone who believes may have eternal life in him. So Mount Nebo on the east side of this Dead Sea. And specifically, this is the text as we sort of bounce back to Deuteronomy 34. Then Moses climbed Mount Nebo from the plains of Moab down below to the top of Pisgah. Pisgah may be the range or the mountain range or area. Nebo may be the specific peak or mountain, but it was across from Jericho. There the Lord showed him the whole land from Gilead, we saw that to the north, to Dan, all of Naphtali, the territory of Ephraim and Manasseh, and all of the land of Judah as far as the Mediterranean Sea, the Negev and the whole region from the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, as far as Zoar. So Moses had a great experience, and yet the Lord said to him, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when I said I will give it to your descendants. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." So are the words of Deuteronomy 34. So let's go to our next site. And this is a great site. It's just to the south of the Sea of Galilee. Let me just maybe look at the map first, and I'll come back to this picture. Gadara is this city. In fact, we hope to go to Gadara in, when is it? I guess next October. And it's about right here. It's actually in Jordan. All of this is Jordan, of course, Mount Nebo, Gilead, but here is Gadara. It's one of the 10 Decapolis cities. And yet, just on the other side of the Yarmouk, this is a wadi or river. It's called the Yarmouk, is already Israel here, the Golan Heights, but a little further east, this is Syria. So we're almost converging 3 countries at this point. Israel to the north and west, of course, the Sea of Galilee, which is in Israel, Syria to the north and east, and of course, we're standing in Jordan. So here is Gadara. In fact, the view of the Sea of Galilee is really why it's worth going to this site. And we'll see that. And again, in a short minute, let me just go back to this picture again. And we can see these late Roman ruins, although some of them are first century. But look at that spectacular view. And of course, we're looking down across this Yarmouk River right below us. And now this is the beginning, the southern end of the Golan Heights. So topographically, it's very, very critical to know that we're looking over or across to Israel. In fact, that little road there, we sometimes take it on a bus. It's a windy road. And some people don't like it because it's a little curvy, of course, but the whole southern end of the lake, Tiberias is there. Arbel Cliffs. I'm sorry, up this way is the plain of Gennesaret, and even the city called Sfat in Israel, here on this higher mountain of the Upper Galilee. So it's a fantastic picture. So this reminds us of at least a story. And we have a translation issue here because some text mentions that when Jesus crossed to the other side of the Sea of Galilee, they went to the region of the Gerasenes. Now, the question is, excuse me, what is that word? Gerasenes. Luke, in some translations, they seem to, translations that is, they seem to favor the term the Gadarenes, certainly after the city of Gadara. So where this man was from, who was demon possessed, of course, and Jesus, of course, exorcised him. The demons end up going into the pigs, uh, down into the lake off the cliff. But we're probably talking about this area called Gadara. And of course, Gadara is a classic Roman site. So where specifically this man was from, it could be from Gadara. It could be from a city a little further north of here. But I love this picture. It's not mine, but there you can still see barely the Sea of Galilee here. So just keep in mind that we're that close to the lake. So this was a Gentile city in the time of Jesus. In fact, this is a very unique theater, intact, not reconstructed like Caesarea, but I think I would have preferred a seat like this. What do you think? It actually has a nice back to it instead of a bench. So this is quite impressive, this theater. But like every other Roman city, it had a colonnaded street, a Roman street. It had very impressive stones cut precisely. And of course, lots of mosaics. And once again, we're looking across to the Golan Heights and the Sea of Galilee. So pay attention to where we're at. But could it be that this man, who just on the other side of this hill here, or else we can sort of bend around here, maybe Jesus confronted this man here and exorcised his demons out of him, and just know that maybe this man then came back and told this city about what Jesus had done. In fact, that was the instructions, as we see in Mark chapter 5. So the man who wanted to go with Jesus, by the way, across to the west side, began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. So I would like to think that this city of Gadara, maybe he was from here, but even if he wasn't, certainly this town knew and found out directly from the testimony of this man what Jesus had done for him. But we have another Decapolis city, I should say. We have 10, of course, total Decapolis cities. Jerash is another one, and one of the most impressive ones. Hippos on the Golan Heights is another one. Beit Shan on the Israeli side of the Jordan Valley is another one. But Jerash, I know some of you have been to Jerash, and it's quite impressive as well. I think on a scale, it's much, much bigger than even Beit Shan, and certainly bigger, than Gadara. So where is Jerash? It is about right. Let's see here. I think I can find it right there. So it's north of Amman, north of the Jabbok River, where, if you recall, Jacob wrestled with God. So Jerash is yet another Decapolis city, but that far south from the Sea of Galilee. So we have some impressive arches. This one is dedicated to Hadrian, the Roman emperor, in the 2nd century, specifically at about 132 AD. So quite impressive. This is basically where we start the tour of Jerash. And then we head to the theater. Great view from the top row of the theater. You can see also a typical theater involved an orchestra area. We know it as the orchestra pit today. Of course, the stage and what is called the scene. The scene was probably 3 times higher than this is. It looks like this was reconstructed somewhat. However, the steps or the seating is original. But the scene was much, much higher, and it served as a way to sort of reflect the voices of those performing back into the uh, area of where people would be watching the performance themselves in the areas of these seats. So the skene probably also had some niches with um, figurines or statues of Roman emperors and so forth. It was a way to honor Roman people and leaders. Here's another picture of this same theater, just on a different day. And of course, the skene that would have been about 3 times as high. But we walk to the far end of Jerash to the beautiful temple of Artemis. This would be Diana. Remember in the book of Acts when Paul goes to the uh, city of Ephesus, of course, they are honoring this goddess of uh, of the Romans and the Greeks, Artemis or Diana. Both names are exchangeable here, interchangeable, I should say, but quite impressive with the pillars and the capitals on top, and just a great picture here of this temple. There's also, of course, other temples like Zeus, and even, believe it or not, a few churches, actually more than a few. Later on, again in the Byzantine period, we have this church of Saint Cosmas and Damian. Sorry, I didn't pronounce it right. Damian. And we have evidence that this is a place that was used for worship by early Christians. You can see the date there. So it's about the 6th century and quite impressive. Usually we can't get too much closer than this, but you can still see the reliefs, the mosaics, I should say. And here's the front of the church, the apse of the church, where the altar would have stood, and probably the baptismal font as well. So, by the way, back here is the theater. And then this structure is one that was used to sort of honor the mythological spirits of nature. And of course, water was always a part of this ritual. These Nymphians, these places where, here in this particular case, there was a big container of water, a carved stone containing water. Sometimes water was, and fountains were a part of this Nymphion. And this one is quite impressive. Look how big and tall this was. And certainly it dates to the end of the 2nd century AD. So long after, of course, the time of Jesus, but still very impressive. There's one that was found at Caesarea, by the way, and most Roman sites had one of these. And of course, the colonnaded street and this area of the arena. Not, I guess I shouldn't say an arena. It's more of the gathering area, the agora, the market area, and look at how impressive these uh, pillars are, and still, of course, standing with a little help of the archaeologists from the archaeologists. So that's Jerash. Let's continue to Petra. This is not one of my pictures, but I found it and I thought it was a great one, of a place called Wadi Musa, the area of the Seir Mountains mentioned in the book of Numbers and Deuteronomy, and you can see them in the distance. This is the area of Edom or Edom. So we have already been up here at Gadara, Jerash, went past Amman, all the way down now, about 3.5 hours from Amman to this area of Petra. Of course, we're going to continue all the way, by the way, to Wadi Rum, and that'll do it for our traveling Tuesday tonight. But look at, again, how big the country of Jordan is, with Syria just to the north, and look how close Iraq, of course, and Saudi here. I think it was last week I mentioned that Saudi actually is just on the other east side of this Gulf of Aqaba. So you can see the western finger of Saudi Arabia, by the way, here. And it's quite close to Israel. I believe I read just recently that perhaps the Saudis will come on board with the Israeli government, and maybe the plan will be that Israel ends up getting some oil from Saudi and piped probably underneath the Red Sea and then up through the southern part of Israel. So that's in terms of some current events that would be pretty interesting for Israel to get oil from Saudi. But this picture is our panoramic one of these mountains that are mentioned in the Bible, and these are the mountains of Petra. Petra was a Nabatean city. The Nabateans were a nomadic people group from probably further east, probably from the Saudi area, but they ended up settling here. There's a couple of Nabatean sites on the west side of the Rift Valley that would be in Israel today. But look how impressive these stones are. This sandstone, typically red in color, although we're going to see other colors displayed. But we're actually going to walk down through what is called the Seek, which begins right there. It's the canyon that goes right through these two higher peaks of the site of Petra. In fact, this is the Seek, spelled S-I-Q, and a great start of about a mile walk into the site of Petra. So we're not even to the site yet. You can actually see this water channel. There was actually one on the other side too, but a water channel that actually brought and channeled water into the city itself. In fact, on both sides of this Seek, you can see what's left of this water channel. But take a look at this magnificent sandstone as we walk through early in the morning before the big crowds come, and we end up walking about 3/4 of a mile until we reach the inside part of Petra. Of course, I think I will come back to that. I guess, sorry, this was sort of out of place here, but once you get into the interior of the site of Petra, we'll see this once again, the Urn Tombs, and of course, many other tombs and camels along the way. But let me just go to this one first, because this is what when we walk through the Seek, this is what we come to. And it's usually a nice surprise for people when we come to the end of the Seek. You can think of Indiana Jones, of course, and this is the Tomb of Eretus. Quite impressive. It's the famous treasury building, and most likely the tomb of Arethus IV. Some will say the third, but I don't think it was. But look how well preserved this actually is. This is from a little higher up, looking at this face of what was a tomb of Arethus IV. He was a very important Nabatean king, probably one of the most important ones. So it's believed that Arethus IV actually had this monument, this tomb, whatever you want to call it, built on his behalf. He would be buried there. Of course, it's called the treasury because when people came over 100 years ago, they thought there was treasure in some of these containers as depicted on top here. But this guy, Arethus, you can see his dates, corresponds quite nicely with what we would read in the Apostle Paul's letter to the church of Corinthians, to the church at Corinth, I should say. He mentions this to the Corinthians about this Arethus, guy who was actually married to, his daughter was married to Herod Antipas, as recorded in Mark 6. So this is how it worked. Arethus's daughter was married to, as I mentioned, to Antipas, and yet Herod Antipas's brother, Philip, was married to someone else. But Antipas wanted to divorce his Nabatean wife to marry Philip's wife. So after this, the Nabateans actually attacked Antipas because of the geopolitical situation was now gone, kaput, because Antipas actually divorced this Nabatean daughter of Arethus. So you can just figure that this really meant some hardships for Antipas. And of course, who was involved right in the middle of this? Should I divorce? Should I not? It's a guy named John the Baptist who was beheaded for coming down hard against divorcing the wife. But here's that reference in 2 Corinthians chapter 11. If we are interested in making some biblical connections, this governor under King Arethus, probably the same guy who's buried here. Although I have to say that some scholars believe it was Arethus III. But here we have the mentioning of a Nabatean who actually controlled even further north this city called Damascus. Twice a week they have night walks into the site of Petra. Some of us have done that. I know Dee and I have done this, but they put these luminaries, if you will, in front of the Treasury building. It's a fantastic experience. In fact, they lined the whole Sikh with these lanterns, but look how fabulous this picture is. Of course, it's not a picture of mine. I don't know who to give credit to, but a great picture as we enjoy the beauty of this tomb of Aretus. And I already mentioned the sandstone. Of course, the sandstone is not just red, but different colors. So from different caves and tombs, you can see how magnificent this stone looks in terms of the reds, the blues, the yellows, you name it. It's all there. So a wonderful display of the color of sandstone. Now, up on the one side and in the middle of the site of Petra are the royal tombs. They're called the Urn Tombs. In fact, this one is the Urn Tomb. But you can, walk up to these tombs and you can just see how large, how tall these tombs are in comparison to the people who sort of look like grasshoppers here, standing beside or in front of that particular tomb. The Roman theater is also quite impressive, cut right out of the rock. This dates to after 106 AD. Now, the Nabateans, and we really don't need to get into this detail, but the Nabateans, since they sort of came to this site and developed it a couple centuries before Christ, in 106 AD, the Romans actually came. I won't call it a hostile takeover, but eventually the Romans took over the control of the site and integrated the Nabateans into their culture. But of course, the Romans were here, so they had to build a theater, just like every other city in the empire. So quite impressive, I should say, with most likely 4,000 or 5,000 people being able to sit here. Of course, the very tail end of, or the western end, I should say, it's at the very tail end of a hike that's about probably an extra 3 miles out and back, is the Monastery Tomb. I would say that this was most likely the second most well-preserved tomb in all of Petra. And you can see it from a distance. It's another beautiful tomb. It's called a monastery because in the Christian period, the Byzantine period, it was used, of course, as just that for Christian purposes. This is a picture from my drone and snuck that in high above one of the peaks. And you can see, I think in some ways, this is just as impressive as the Treasury tomb or monument, but not many people come out this far. It's a long walk. In fact, from the beginning of the site to here and back to the site, it's about a 9-mile round trip. However, if you also include the high place in that walk, it ends up about a 11.5-mile walk out and back. So whereas the monastery tomb is out beyond this rock face. This beautiful hike up the back end or the back side of the high place really exposes other very beautiful tombs as well. Again, Petra is a place for tombs. In fact, the Nabateans prepared their whole life for where they were to be buried. And then the high place dedicated to the god Dushara. So at the very end of this high hike to the top of the high place, you can just see some of that rock cut out. The altar would have been right here. This is again from our drone of the high place where Dushara, the Nabatean god of the mountain, was honored. But we can also walk down this way and then get one last glimpse of, again, the prominent area of Petra, the Jordanian flag, and of course, a great perspective. I guess I didn't include perspective of the Urn Tomb in this presentation, but that's the last picture from Petra. So Petra is certainly one of the seven wonders of the world and very well worth going there. In fact, a one-day pass costs $75, though I just learned 2 weeks ago that in 2022, Jordan is increasing their pricing by 25%. So I'm guessing that the entry fee here will even go higher. So we're going to end with the southern part of Jordan, and this means Wadi Rum. Wadi Rum. Again, the word wadi means dry riverbed. So after visiting Bethany Beyond the Jordan, Mount Nebo, Jerash, Petra, Gadara, Jerash, Petra, now our last site for the evening is Wadi Rum. So you can see how far south it is. And this brings us to some modern history with this guy. How many of you remember watching this movie, Sir Lawrence of Arabia? This British guy who actually fights for the Bedouin against the Turks in World War I, 1917. And there he is, Peter O'Toole, of course, riding on a camel. And it's a great movie, a long movie, but this Wadi Rum area is where they honor this guy. So that's a little relief in this red sandstone of Wadi Rum, but great perspectives of this desert area. It's quite fascinating. In fact, what we do is we ride in, they call them Jeeps. They're essentially pickup trucks with an open bed and some benches on the back, but you can see how beautiful this area actually is. So we get out and make a few stops. We buzz across the sand. We enjoy watching the camels. Sometimes we can ride the camels, but it's quite amazing and a beautiful area of southern Jordan. So here's another perspective of the Jeep caravan, if you will, as we stop different places and enjoy the uniqueness of the cutting out of this canyon, if you will, and enjoying the beauty of God's creation. Of course, part of the experience is to enjoy the sunset. So we typically arrive here in the afternoon and we make it over the sand. We get out sometimes and walk up sand dunes, but our objective is to enjoy the beautiful sunset here in Wadi Rum. So great perspective of this desert. So when you fly high, we can get some girls who actually were adventurous in our group and actually took a great perspective, a high one, of the sunset. And yet that night, then we drive to our Bedouin facility, our Bedouin camp called Captain's, where we enjoy a night in tents and some Bedouin hospitality and music, and it's a great adventure. So I believe that concludes our our trip to Jordan. I know there's other sites. There's different sites within Amman itself. There's the Acropolis, where you can actually visit into the museum where some of the copper scrolls are displayed. In fact, I think that museum actually is no longer on the Acropolis. I have not been there for a couple of years, but some of the Dead Sea findings or discoveries. One is called the Copper Scrolls. They're actually displayed there in Amman. And of course, Amman was Philadelphia in the 2nd century. The name changed. So a lot of Roman history there, and of course, some connections as well with the Bible. The Ammonites lived there, but I didn't show any pictures from Amman tonight. So just a few glimpses at some of these more, I would say, significant sites within Jordan. And I hope you enjoyed our visit together tonight. So, again, thanks for joining us. Keep in mind that next week we will then go to Egypt. I think you're going to really enjoy the connections that we make. We're going to walk through from the time of Abraham to actually Josiah and try to figure out who the pharaohs were and what was happening during the course of biblical chronology and history. But then we're going to begin in the Valley of the Kings. We're going to go actually inside of at least 3 or 4 tombs of the pharaohs, probably Ramses the Fourth, Ramses the Sixth, maybe Ramses the Third, probably Thutmose the Third, and get a sneak peek at King Tut's tomb. And then we're going to see a couple temples. So we're not sure how far we're going to get next week. I know I've already added a lot of slides, but wherever we leave off after next week, we'll continue with the temples of Karnak and Luxor, and then head to Cairo for, of course, Saqqara, the oldest of the pyramids. There's about 112 or so now pyramids discovered. We may even go into 1 or 2. And then Memphis, a small, older capital of the Old Kingdom, I should say. Not much there, but a very impressive statue of Ramses II. And then, of course, conclude with the pyramids in Cairo, in Giza, I should say, the Great Sphinx, and maybe take a look quickly into the Egyptian Museum. Again, making some biblical connections there. So I guess that's it for tonight. I hope you enjoyed Jordan. I'll again hang out here with you if you want to ask any questions or just wanted to chat for friendship's sake. So, but then anyway, before you get to the questions, let me just say thank you so much. And until next week, we'll hope that God protects you and gives you his joy. So thanks very much, and shalom and good night.